I was standing in my driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, watching my propane tank gauge drop to empty for the third time in 2 months, and I knew something was seriously wrong. My name is Derek Anderson, and I had just moved into the Saguaro Ridge community 6 months earlier. The subdivision was one of those cookie-cutter developments on the outskirts of Phoenix where every house looked identical except for the paint color. Mine was a pleasant desert tan with brown trim. I had bought the place because the price was right, and I worked remotely as a software developer, so the commute did not matter. What I did not anticipate was the homeowners association from hell. The propane tank in question was for my outdoor grill and patio heater. Living in Arizona meant you could actually use your backyard most of the year, and I loved grilling. I had installed a proper commercial-grade grill setup with a direct connection to a large propane tank that sat on the side of my house. The tank was not cheap. I paid nearly $400 to have it installed and filled. The first time it ran empty, I figured I had been grilling more than I thought. The second time, I started to get suspicious. Now, standing here looking at the empty gauge when I had just refilled it 2 weeks ago and barely used the grill, I knew someone was stealing my propane. I pulled out my phone and started checking my Ring camera footage. I had cameras covering my front door and driveway, but not the side yard where the tank was located. That was going to change. I ordered a wireless camera on Amazon right then and there, paying extra for same-day delivery. The camera arrived that evening, and I spent an hour setting it up with a clear view of the propane tank. The installation was simple enough, and I made sure the motion detection was properly calibrated. If anyone came near that tank, I would know about it. 2 days later, I got my answer. I was sitting at my desk working on a coding project when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera feed and could not believe what I was seeing. A middle-aged woman with short blonde hair styled in what I could only describe as the signature Karen cut was standing next to my propane tank. She had a hose running from my tank to what looked like a portable camping tank she was trying to fill. I jumped up from my desk and headed outside, but by the time I got there, she was gone. I checked the footage again and got a clear view of her face. I did not recognize her immediately, but then I remembered seeing her at the HOA meeting I had attended when I first moved in. She was on the board. The next morning, I went through my HOA paperwork and found the board member list. There she was, Patricia Zimmerman, Vice President of the Saguaro Ridge HOA. Her house was 3 streets over from mine. I saved the video footage to my computer and my cloud storage, making multiple backups. Then I walked over to Patricia's house. It was a Tuesday morning around 10 and her car was in the driveway. I rang the doorbell. She answered wearing yoga pants and a purple tank top, holding a coffee mug. Her expression went from neutral to suspicious the moment she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, not opening the screen door. "Hi, I am Derek Anderson from Cactus Lane. I think we need to talk about my propane tank." Her face tightened. "I don't know what you are talking about. Really? Because I have you on camera filling your personal propane tank from mine yesterday afternoon." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "That is absurd. You must be mistaken. I have clear video footage, Patricia. You were using my propane without permission. That is theft." She crossed her arms. "I think you are confused. HOA members have access to community resources for HOA purposes. I was preparing for the community barbecue next month. By stealing propane from my personal tank, that does not make any sense, and this has been happening for months. The community barbecue does not explain the other times my tank has been mysteriously emptied." "I think you should leave," she said, starting to close the door. I am giving you a chance to make this right, I said firmly. Reimburse me for the propane you have taken, and we can move past this. I am not paying you anything, and if you harass me again, I will file a complaint with the HOA board. In fact, I will be filing one anyway. You cannot have security cameras that invade the privacy of other residents. The camera is on my property, pointing at my property. We will see what the board has to say about that. She shut the door in my face. I walked back home, frustrated but not surprised. I had dealt with enough difficult people in my life to know that Patricia was not going to admit fault or make things right voluntarily. I needed to document everything and be prepared for whatever she threw at me next. That evening, I went to Home Depot and bought materials to build a locking cage around my propane tank. I spent the next day constructing a sturdy metal cage with a padlock. The cage was well built, securely anchored to the concrete pad, and there was no way anyone could access the tank without the key. I made sure everything was up to code and did not violate any city regulations. 3 days later, I got a letter from the HOA. The letter was formal and typed on official HOA letterhead. It stated that I was in violation of multiple community covenants and restrictions. First, I had installed a security camera without prior approval. Second, I had constructed an unsightly metal structure without architectural review board approval. Third, the letter claimed I was being hostile and aggressive toward board members, and that further incidents would result in fines and possible legal action. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each read. The hypocrisy was stunning. Patricia had been stealing from me for months, and now she was using her position on the HOA board to retaliate when I caught her. I pulled out my copy of the HOA rules and regulations and spent the evening reading through every page. The security camera issue was murky. The rules stated that exterior modifications required approval, but security cameras were not explicitly mentioned. The cage around the propane tank was more problematic. Technically, any exterior structure did require architectural review board approval. However, I also found a clause that stated emergency security measures could be taken if a homeowner's property was being threatened or stolen, with post facto notification to the board. I could work with that. I drafted a detailed response letter. I explained that my propane had been systematically stolen over several months, resulting in hundreds of dollars in losses. I stated that I had video evidence of the theft and had attempted to resolve the matter privately before taking security measures. I noted that the security cage was an emergency measure to prevent further theft and included documentation of the costs I had incurred. I also formally requested that the board investigate the theft and take appropriate action against the board member responsible. I sent the letter certified mail to the HOA management company and to each board member individually, including Patricia. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. 5 days later, I received a phone call from Gregory Morrison, the HOA president. He asked if we could meet in person to discuss the situation. We met at a coffee shop near the neighborhood. Gregory was in his 60s, retired, and had been living in Saguaro Ridge since the development was first built 15 years ago. He seemed reasonable enough during the HOA meeting I had attended, though I had not interacted with him much. "Derek, I appreciate you meeting with me," he said as we sat down with our coffees. "I want to understand what is going on here." "I am happy to explain," I said, pulling out my tablet. "I have been having propane stolen from my property for months. I finally installed a security camera and caught the person responsible." I showed him the video footage. Gregory watched silently, his expression growing more troubled as the video played. "That is definitely Patricia," he said quietly. "Yes. I confronted her about it privately, gave her a chance to make things right. Instead, she threatened me and used her position on the board to file complaints against me for taking steps to protect my property." Gregory rubbed his face. "This is a mess. It does not have to be. I want to be reimbursed for the propane that was stolen. Based on my tank records and the frequency of refills, I estimate she has taken about $300 worth of propane over the past few months. I want the bogus violations removed from my record, and I want an assurance that I will not face retaliation for reporting theft by a board member." "That seems reasonable," Gregory said, "but there is a complication. Patricia is claiming the propane tank is technically HOA property because it is visible from the street and connected to community utilities." I stared at him. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. It is on my property, purchased with my money, filled with propane I paid for. It is not connected to any community utilities. It is my personal property." "I agree with you," Gregory said, raising his hands. "I am just telling you what she is claiming. She has always been difficult to work with on the board, if I am being honest. She sees her position as giving her authority that it really does not give her. So, what happens now? I am going to call an emergency board meeting. We need to address this formally. I would like you to present your evidence to the full board. Patricia will not be allowed to participate in the vote or discussion since she is the subject of the complaint." "When?" "How about Thursday evening? 7 o'clock at the community center," I agreed, and we parted ways. I spent the next 2 days preparing a presentation with all my documentation, the video footage, receipts for propane refills, and a timeline of events. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center feeling nervous but prepared. The Saguaro Ridge Community Center was a modest building with a meeting room, a small gym, and a pool area. The meeting room had about 20 chairs set up, and the 5 board members sat at a table at the front. Gregory was there, along with 2 board members I did not know well, Sandra Martinez, the treasurer, and Robert Chen, the secretary. Patricia sat at the far end of the table, her arms crossed and her expression hostile. The 5th board member, apparently, was on vacation. "Thank you for coming, Derek," Gregory said. "We are here tonight to address the complaint you filed regarding property theft and the subsequent violations filed against you. Derek, why do not you start by presenting your case?" I connected my laptop to the projector and walked through everything methodically. I showed the receipts documenting the abnormal propane usage, the video footage of Patricia taking propane from my tank, the timeline of events, and my attempts to resolve the matter privately before installing security measures. The room was silent as I presented. Sandra and Robert watched the video footage with obvious discomfort. Patricia sat stone-faced, staring straight ahead. When I finished, Gregory asked, "Patricia, would you like to respond?" She stood up, smoothing her shirt. "This is clearly a witch hunt. Derek has been hostile toward me since he moved in. The propane tank in question is part of the community aesthetic resources, and I was performing my duties as a board member to ensure community standards were being maintained. I took a small amount of propane to test whether the tank was being properly maintained and posed a safety risk. By filling your personal camping tank?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "I was transferring it to a testing container," she snapped. "Do you have any documentation of this safety inspection?" Robert asked. "Any record that this was an official HOA action?" Patricia hesitated. "It was an informal inspection based on resident complaints about propane odors in the area." "What residents?" Sandra asked. I have not received any complaints about propane odors. The complaints were made to me directly, Patricia said. So you have no documentation, no records, no authorization from the board to conduct this inspection? Gregory asked. I am the vice president. I do not need authorization for basic safety inspections. Actually, you do, Gregory said, pulling out a binder. According to our bylaws, any inspection of private property requires board approval and advance notice to the homeowner. You did neither. This is ridiculous, Patricia said, her voice rising. You are all taking the side of someone who has been here 6 months over a board member who has served this community for 5 years. We are following the rules and the evidence, Gregory said calmly. Derek has clear documentation and video evidence. You have unsupported claims and no documentation. Sandra leaned forward. Patricia, I need to ask directly. Did you take propane from Derek's tank without permission? I already explained what happened, Patricia said. That is not a yes or no answer, Sandra pressed. Patricia glared at her. Fine. Yes, I took some propane, but it was for community purposes, testing the safety of the tank, and he has no right to lock up community visible property without approval. It is not community property, I said firmly. It is on my land, purchased with my money. You stole from me, then filed false complaints when I took steps to protect my property. I want to call for a vote, Gregory said. All in favor of finding that Patricia Zimmerman violated community rules and homeowner property rights by taking propane without permission, say aye. Aye, said Gregory. Aye, said Sandra. Aye, said Robert. This is outrageous, Patricia shouted, standing up so quickly her chair tipped over. I will sue all of you. I will sue the HOA. You cannot do this to me. Sit down, Patricia, Gregory said. We are not done. We also need to vote on the violations filed against Derek. The board quickly voted to dismiss all violations against me, finding that the security camera and the propane cage were justified security measures in response to ongoing theft. They also voted to require Patricia to reimburse me $300 for the stolen propane. Patricia refused to sit back down. I am not paying him a dime. This is a kangaroo court. I am resigning from this board effective immediately, and my lawyer will be in touch. She stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her. Gregory sighed heavily. Well, that went about as well as I expected. Derek, I apologize on behalf of the board. This should never have happened. We will process the reimbursement through HOA funds and pursue collection from Patricia separately. Thank you, I said, feeling a mix of relief and residual anger. One more thing, Sandra said. We would like to formally invite you to consider joining the board. We are going to need a new vice president, and frankly, we need more people who are willing to stand up for what is right. I had not expected that. I appreciate the offer. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. I drove home that night feeling like a weight had been lifted. The HOA had actually done the right thing, which restored some of my faith in the system. But I knew Patricia was not going to let this go quietly. I was right. 2 weeks later, I received a demand letter from a lawyer representing Patricia Zimmerman. The letter claimed I had defamed her character, invaded her privacy with unauthorized surveillance, and caused her emotional distress. She was demanding $50,000 in damages. I immediately contacted my homeowner's insurance company. They assigned a lawyer to review the case. Her name was Rachel Morrison, no relation to Gregory, and she was a sharp attorney in her early 40s who specialized in HOA disputes and property law. This is a nuisance lawsuit, Rachel said when we met in her Phoenix office. She is trying to intimidate you into backing down. Everything you did was legal. The surveillance camera was on your property, recording your property. You were protecting yourself from theft. Her claims are baseless. So what do? We file a response denying everything and countersue for the cost of the stolen propane, the cost of the security measures you had to install, and legal fees. We also notify the Phoenix Police Department about the theft. What she did is a crime, and having a police report on record will strengthen our position. Will that escalate things? She already escalated things by filing this lawsuit. We are just defending you properly. I agreed with Rachel's approach. She filed the response and the counterclaim, and I went to the Phoenix Police Department to file a theft report. The officer who took my report was skeptical at first, but when I showed him the video footage and explained the situation, he took it seriously. "Madam was on the HOA board?" he asked. "Yes, and she used her position to retaliate when I caught her. We see this kind of thing more than you would think. HOA board members who think they are above the rules. I will write this up and forward it to the Detective Bureau. Someone will follow up with you." A detective named Sarah Ramirez called me 3 days later. She asked me to come to the station to give a formal statement. I brought all my documentation, the video footage, and a timeline of events. Detective Ramirez was thorough. She watched the video multiple times, reviewed all the receipts, and asked detailed questions about my interactions with Patricia. "This is pretty clear-cut theft," she said. "The value is under $1,000, so we are looking at a misdemeanor, but it is still a crime. The fact that she is on the HOA board and filed retaliatory complaints makes it worse. I am going to present this to the prosecutor's office and recommend charges." What happens then? If the prosecutor agrees, we will file charges and Patricia will be summoned to court. Given that she has no prior record, assuming she does not, she will probably be offered a plea deal. Restitution, probation, community service, that sort of thing, but it will be on her record. And the lawsuit she filed against me, that is civil, separate from the criminal case. But if she is charged criminally, it will definitely help your defense in the civil case. Things moved slowly after that. The legal system does not work on the timelines you see on television. 2 months passed. Patricia's lawyer sent increasingly aggressive letters, which Rachel calmly responded to with detailed legal arguments and the threat of sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. During this time, life in the Saguaro Ridge community continued. I kept my head down, focused on work, and used my grill regularly, secure in the knowledge that my propane tank was protected. Several neighbors approached me privately to express support. Apparently, Patricia had made herself unpopular over the years with her aggressive enforcement of petty rules and her condescending attitude. One neighbor, an older man named Frank Delgado who lived 2 houses down, stopped me while I was checking my mail. "I heard about what happened with Patricia," he said. "Good for you for standing up to her. She fined me $200 last year because my garbage can was visible from the street for 3 hours after trash pickup. 3 hours. I was at a doctor's appointment." "That is ridiculous," I said. "She has been a tyrant for years. Most people just pay the fines and move on because fighting the HOA is expensive and exhausting. But she finally messed with someone who was willing to fight back." I heard similar stories from other neighbors. Patricia had a pattern of using her HOA position to bully people over minor issues. She seemed to enjoy the power it gave her. In late August, 4 months after the initial incident, Detective Ramirez called me with an update. The prosecutor's office has filed charges. Petty theft and abuse of authority. Patricia has been ordered to appear in court next month. What does abuse of authority mean? It is a charge we sometimes use when public officials or people in positions of power use that position to commit crimes or retaliate against victims. The prosecutor is arguing that Patricia used her HOA position to both commit the theft and then retaliate against you when you reported it. Will I have to testify? Probably, unless she takes a plea deal. I will keep you updated. Patricia did not take the initial plea deal. According to Rachel, who was in communication with the prosecutor, Patricia was insisting she had done nothing wrong and demanding the charges be dropped. Her criminal defense lawyer apparently advised her to take the plea, but she refused. The case went to trial in October. It was held at the Phoenix Municipal Court, a busy place that handled misdemeanor cases. I took the day off work to testify. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and there were several other cases being heard that day. Patricia sat at the defense table with her lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s. She would not look at me when I entered the courtroom. The prosecutor was a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, who looked fresh out of law school but carried herself with confidence. She called me to the stand mid-morning. Testifying was nerve-wracking, but Jennifer made it straightforward. She walked me through the timeline, showed the video footage to the judge, and entered all my documentation as evidence. The defense lawyer tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that I had misunderstood Patricia's intentions and that the propane tank was in a gray area of property ownership. "Is the propane tank on your property?" he asked. "Yes." "Is it connected to your house utilities?" "Yes, to my grill." "But it is visible from the street." "So is my car, but that does not make it community property." Several people in the gallery laughed. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Andrea Thornton, gave me a slight nod of approval. Patricia took the stand in her own defense, which surprised me. She insisted that she had been conducting a legitimate safety inspection and that I had overreacted. She claimed she was being persecuted for doing her job as an HOA board member. Jennifer Walsh destroyed her on cross-examination. "Did you have board authorization to conduct this inspection?" "I did not need authorization." "According to your own HOA bylaws, you did. Did you give Mr. Anderson advance notice of this inspection?" "No." "Did you file any documentation of this alleged safety inspection?" "No." "Did you file any report about propane odors or safety concerns before or after this incident?" "No, but yes or no answers, please. Did you, in fact, fill a personal propane tank from Mr. Anderson's tank?" Patricia hesitated. "Yes, but only to properly test. Yes or no?" "Yes." "And after Mr. Anderson confronted you about this theft, did you use your position as HOA vice president to file complaints against him?" "They were legitimate complaints about violations. Violations that the HOA board subsequently dismissed as baseless, correct?" "That board was biased." "Is the entire board biased, or is it possible you were in the wrong?" Patricia's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Judge Thornton took a recess to consider the evidence. When we returned to the courtroom an hour later, she delivered her verdict. "I find the defendant guilty on both counts. Miss Zimmerman, you abused your position on the Homeowners Association board to take property that did not belong to you, and then you retaliated against the victim when he reported your actions. This kind of behavior is unacceptable and undermines the legitimate function of homeowners associations. I am sentencing you to 6 months probation, 100 hours of community service, and you will pay restitution to Mr. Anderson in the amount of $300 for the stolen propane, plus an additional $500 for the security measures he was forced to install. You are also prohibited from serving on any HOA board during your probation period." Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Her lawyer immediately stood to request an appeal, but Judge Thornton was not having it. "You can appeal if you like, but the evidence in this case is overwhelming. I suggest you accept responsibility for your actions and move forward. Court is adjourned." I walked out of that courtroom feeling vindicated. Patricia rushed past me without making eye contact, her lawyer trailing behind her trying to talk to her. Jennifer Walsh caught up with me in the hallway. "Congratulations," she said. "Not every victim is willing to go through this process. You did the right thing." "Thank you for your work on this," I said. "Just doing my job. You should know this conviction will help with your civil case. Her lawsuit against you is dead in the water now." She was right. Within 2 weeks, Patricia's lawyer withdrew the defamation lawsuit against me. Rachel sent me a bill for her services, which my homeowner's insurance largely covered, and that chapter closed. But there was still unfinished business with the HOA. Gregory Morrison called me in early November. "Derek, I wanted to update you on some changes in the community. Patricia officially resigned from the board, obviously. We have also made some changes to our rules and procedures to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. We have established clearer guidelines for property inspections. We have implemented a formal complaint process with oversight, and we have added a conflicts of interest policy for board members." "That sounds like good progress," I said. "It is. And I wanted to ask you again about joining the board. We really need someone with your integrity and willingness to stand up for what is right. You have already done more for this community than most people by exposing the problems we had. I think you could help us build something better." I had been thinking about this offer on and off for months. Part of me wanted nothing to do with HOA politics after everything that had happened. But another part of me recognized that the only way to prevent people like Patricia from taking over was for reasonable people to get involved. "Okay," I said, "I will do it, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, complete transparency. All board meetings, all decisions, all finances need to be accessible to homeowners. Second, we focus on things that actually matter: safety, property values, community events, not petty enforcement of aesthetic rules. Third, if I see something wrong, I am going to speak up, even if it makes people uncomfortable. I would expect nothing less. Those terms are completely acceptable." Welcome to the board, Derek. I was officially appointed as the new vice president of the Saguaro Ridge HOA in December, filling Patricia's vacant position. My first board meeting was eye-opening. The HOA had accumulated a lot of dysfunction over the years, much of it driven by Patricia's aggressive approach to enforcement. One of my first actions was to review all outstanding violations and fines. We found dozens of cases like Frank Delgado's, where homeowners had been fined for minor, temporary issues. We reversed most of them and refunded the fines that had been paid. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. We also established a new community newsletter with transparent reporting of board activities, finances, and upcoming decisions. We created an online portal where homeowners could submit maintenance requests, complaints, and suggestions. We held quarterly town halls where residents could voice concerns directly to the board. It was not all smooth sailing. There was a contingent of residents who preferred Patricia's strict enforcement approach and thought we were being too lenient. One woman, Dorothy Phelps, was particularly vocal at board meetings about how the community was going downhill, because we were not fining people for having their garage doors open during the day or having decorative flags that were not pre-approved. "Dorothy, I understand your concerns," I said at one particularly contentious meeting in February. "But we have to balance community standards with respect for homeowners' property rights and common sense. Someone having their garage door open during the day is not a violation worth fighting over. It does not harm anyone, It does not reduce property values. It is just someone using their house the way they want to use it. But the rules say, she started. The rules say a lot of things, I interrupted. Many of them written decades ago and never updated. Part of our job as a board is to enforce rules that make sense and revise or eliminate rules that do not. If a rule is not serving the community, we should change it. We put several rule changes to a community vote and pass them with strong majorities. The HOA was slowly transforming from an adversarial organization that residents feared into an actual community organization that served residents' interests. As for Patricia, I saw her around the neighborhood occasionally. She always looked away when she saw me, and we never spoke. According to the neighborhood gossip network, she had become something of a pariah. Many residents who had suffered under her enforcement regime were not quick to forgive. She put her house on the market in March and moved out in April. Frank Delgado stopped by my house the day Patricia's moving truck pulled away. "I brought you something," he said, holding out a 6-pack of local craft beer. "To thank you for everything you did. You made this neighborhood a better place." "I just protected my propane tank," I said with a smile. "You did a lot more than that. You stood up to a bully. You showed people that the HOA does not have unlimited power. You made it possible for the rest of us to feel like we actually own our homes instead of just renting them from the HOA." We sat on my back patio, drinking beer and grilling steaks on my propane grill. The cage was still around the tank, though I did not really need it anymore. I kept it as a reminder of the whole ordeal and as a conversation piece. Other neighbors joined us as the evening went on. It turned into an impromptu block party. Someone brought music. Someone else brought side dishes. Kids ran around playing in the common areas. It was the kind of community gathering that HOAs are supposed to foster, but often fail to create. Gregory Morrison showed up with his wife, Carol. "This is what I envisioned when I first moved here," he said, looking around at the neighbors talking and laughing together. "A real community, not just a collection of houses with a bunch of rules." "It takes work," I said, "and it takes people being willing to get involved." "Speaking of which," Gregory said, "I am planning to step down as president at the end of the year. I have been doing this for 8 years, and I think it is time for fresh blood. I wanted to give you advance notice because I am hoping you will consider running for president." I almost choked on my beer. "Me, I have been on the board for less than a year. And you have already made more positive changes than we made in the previous 5 years combined. The community trusts you. You have shown you are willing to make hard decisions and stand up for what is right." Think about it. I did think about it, long and hard. Being HOA president was a significant commitment, and I had a full-time job and a life outside the neighborhood. But I also recognized that this was an opportunity to help shape the community into something better. In September, I announced my candidacy for HOA president. There was one other candidate, a longtime resident named Walter Kim, who was more aligned with the old strict enforcement approach. The election took place in November, and I won with 68% of the vote. My first major initiative as president was to establish a legal defense fund for homeowners who faced unfair actions from the HOA. The fund was designed to ensure that what happened to me, having to fight back against HOA overreach, would be easier for future residents if it ever became necessary. We also implemented term limits for board members and created a resident oversight committee to review board decisions. The Phoenix HOA community took notice of what we were doing in Saguaro Ridge. I was invited to speak at a regional HOA conference about reforming troubled associations and establishing accountability. The story of Patricia and the propane tank became something of a cautionary tale in HOA management circles. As for the propane tank itself, it became a bit of a neighborhood landmark. New residents would hear the story and come by to see the famous locked cage. I eventually had a small plaque made that I attached to the cage, in memory of $300 worth of propane and the reminder that no one is above the rules. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. Without the video footage and receipts, it would have been my word against Patricia's, and as an HOA board member, she would have had the advantage. Second, standing up to bullies is hard but necessary. If I had just paid for more propane and let it go, Patricia would have continued to abuse her position and other residents would have continued to suffer. Third, systems only work when good people participate. The HOA was dysfunctional because reasonable people had checked out and left it to people like Patricia who enjoyed wielding power over others. 2 years after the initial incident, I was sitting on my back patio on a warm Phoenix evening in June, grilling chicken for a community board meeting that I was hosting at my house. The new board members were arriving, bringing side dishes and drinks. We had transformed board meetings from formal, adversarial affairs held in the sterile community center to regular potluck gatherings where we conducted business in a relaxed, collaborative atmosphere. Sarah Chen, our new treasurer, arrived with a homemade potato salad. "I have the quarterly financial reports," she said, setting the dish on the patio table. "We are in the best financial shape we have been in years. Delinquencies are down, reserve funds are fully funded, and we even have a surplus that we can use for community improvements." "That is what happens when residents actually trust their HOA," I said, flipping the chicken. Marcus Thompson, our secretary, was next to arrive. "I finalized the agenda for the town hall next week. We have 15 residents signed up to speak, mostly about the playground renovation and the proposal for a community garden." Good. Real issues that matter to people's daily lives. The meeting that evening was productive. We approved the playground renovation, allocated funds for the community garden, reviewed and approved several architectural requests for home improvements, and discussed plans for the annual holiday party. The entire meeting took 90 minutes, including dinner. We made decisions efficiently, treated each other with respect, and focused on serving the community rather than controlling it. After everyone left, I cleaned up the patio and stood looking at the propane tank in its cage. The gauge showed half full. I had grilled at least a dozen times since the last refill, and the propane was being used at exactly the rate it should be. No more mysterious disappearances. No more theft. Just a homeowner using his property the way it was meant to be used. My phone buzzed with a text from Gregory Morrison. "Heard the meeting went well. Proud of what you have built there. Coffee next week." I texted back confirmation and went inside. I had work in the morning, a video call with a client on the East Coast. Life in Saguaro Ridge had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA functioned smoothly. The community was engaged and happy, and my propane tank remained secure in its cage. Sometimes, I wondered what Patricia was doing. According to mutual acquaintances, she had moved to Scottsdale and joined another HOA board there. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I was not optimistic. Some people never change. They just find new places to exercise their need for control. But that was not my problem anymore. I had done what I needed to do, protected my property, stood up for what was right, and helped build a better community in the process. The propane tank theft had been frustrating and infuriating at the time, but it had ultimately led to positive change that benefited everyone in Saguaro Ridge. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at my desk to answer some emails before bed. Through the window, I could see the neighborhood settling in for the night. Porch lights flickered on. The sound of laughter drifted from a few houses down where another family was enjoying their backyard. A dog barked in the distance. This was what a neighborhood should be. Not a collection of rules and restrictions and petty enforcement actions, but a place where people felt comfortable in their homes, where disputes were resolved fairly, where the governing body actually served the residents rather than ruling over them. The legal case had concluded months ago. Patricia had paid all the restitution ordered by the court, though it had come through the court's collections process rather than directly from her. Her criminal probation would end in a few months, and then she would be free to join another HOA board if she wanted to. I hoped she would not, but that was not my decision to make. The civil lawsuit she had filed against me was officially dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could not refile it. My homeowner's insurance had covered most of Rachel's legal fees, and the remainder was offset by the restitution I received. In the end, the whole ordeal had cost me some stress and time, but not significant money. More importantly, it had cost Patricia her position, her reputation in the community, and resulted in a criminal conviction. I did not take pleasure in that. I had not set out to destroy anyone. I had just wanted to protect my property and be treated fairly. But when she had chosen to abuse her position and retaliate against me rather than accept responsibility, she had set the consequences in motion herself. The next morning, I was up early for my video call. As I made coffee, I looked out the kitchen window at the neighborhood coming to life. Frank Delgado was out walking his dog. The Martinez family from the corner house were loading up their car for what looked like a beach trip. A delivery truck was making its rounds. It was easy to take these peaceful, ordinary moments for granted. But I had learned that they required maintenance and protection. Communities do not run themselves, and HOAs do not automatically serve their residents' interests. It takes engaged, principled people willing to do the work and make the hard decisions. My phone rang. It was Walter Kim, the resident who had run against me for president and was now serving on the Architectural Review Board. Derek, sorry to call so early. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Dorothy Phelps submitted a formal complaint about the Johnsons' front yard landscaping. She is saying it violates the aesthetic standards and is demanding fines. I sighed. Dorothy Phelps, the resident who preferred Patricia's enforcement style, was apparently not giving up. What is wrong with their landscaping? Nothing, as far as I can tell. They replaced some grass with native desert plants to save water, which should be encouraged. But Dorothy is claiming it looks unkempt and is not in keeping with community standards. Okay, schedule it for discussion at the next board meeting. We will review it properly and make a decision based on the actual rules, not Dorothy's personal preferences. In the meantime, make sure the Johnsons know their landscaping is not in violation of anything and they do not need to change it. Already done. I figured you would say that. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. Thanks, Walter. I appreciate it. This was the reality of HOA governance. There would always be challenges, always be residents like Dorothy who wanted stricter enforcement, always be situations that required judgment and balance. But with good processes, good people, and a commitment to fairness, these challenges could be managed without descending into the dysfunction that had characterized the Patricia era. The video call with my client went well. We were debugging some complex software architecture issues, and I spent 3 hours deep in code before breaking for lunch. I made a sandwich and ate it on the back patio, enjoying the warm Arizona sun. The propane tank sat in its cage, silent and secure. It had become more than just a fuel source for my grill. It was a symbol of property rights, of standing up to abuse of power, of the importance of accountability. Every time I grilled, every time I saw that cage, I was reminded of why community governance matters and why good people need to participate. Later that afternoon, I got an email from the Phoenix HOA Management Association asking if I would be willing to serve on a task force to develop best practices for HOA governance. They specifically mentioned the reforms we had implemented in Saguaro Ridge as a model for other communities. I accepted. The problems I had experienced with Patricia were not unique to my neighborhood. Across the country, HOAs struggled with the same issues. Board members who abused their positions, residents who felt powerless against their governing bodies, petty enforcement of trivial rules, and a lack of transparency and accountability. If my experience could help other communities avoid these problems, it was worth the time investment. I drafted a response accepting the invitation and outlining some of the key principles that had guided our reforms: transparency, proportionality, respect for property rights, clear processes for complaints and appeals, and term limits for board members. That evening, I grilled steaks for dinner. As the propane flame heated the grill, I thought about the journey that had started with a mysteriously empty tank and led to community transformation, criminal prosecution, and eventually to my current role as HOA president and advocate for reform. It had been exhausting at times. There had been moments when I questioned whether fighting was worth it, whether I should just pay for more propane and move to a neighborhood without an HOA. But I was glad I had stayed and fought. Not just for myself, but for Frank Delgado and the Martinez family and all the other residents who had been bullied by Patricia over the years. Change is possible. Systems can be reformed. Bullies can be held accountable. But it requires people willing to do the hard work of documentation, confrontation, and persistence. It requires people willing to get involved rather than complaining from the sidelines. As I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed with a message from Sandra Martinez, our former treasurer who had since moved out of state. Saw the news about the task force. Congratulations. You really have made a difference. Saguaro Ridge is lucky to have you. I texted back a thank you and finished my dinner. The sun was setting over the Phoenix skyline, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone else was probably grilling dinner, maybe using their own propane tank, not worried about it being stolen because the culture had changed. That was the real victory. Not the criminal conviction or the lawsuit being dismissed, or even the reforms we had implemented. The real victory was that residents felt safe and respected in their own homes. They trusted their HOA to be fair. They were not afraid to use their property the way they wanted to use it. The propane tank and its cage would remain a conversation piece, a reminder of what had happened and why it mattered. But more importantly, it was a reminder of what was possible when ordinary people refused to accept abuse of power and were willing to fight for accountability. As darkness fell over Saguaro Ridge, I locked up the house and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new board business, new residents with concerns and complaints. But I was ready for it. I had learned that serving a community was not always easy, but it was worth it. And I had plenty of propane in my tank, locked safely in its cage, ready for the next backyard barbecue.